First of all, this gentleman has played on 250 albums in his career across a wide range of music, and that in itself is a stunning number. But listen to some of the people, and this is a man, well, you'll tell us about where you put jazz, but he's certainly a jazz pianist, but far more than that, here are some of the people that Roger Kellaway has recorded with. Duke Ellington, Elvis Presley, Carmen McRae, Barbra Streisand, Quincy Jones, Yo-Yo Ma. That's quite a collection. We're not even talking about some of the other jazz people. So just right there, we could probably spend the whole night, but let's not. Just give us a taste of these different and the range and just some of the experiences.
Everybody wants to know about Elvis.
Okay.
Basically.
More than any of the others?
I almost, because you won't find any other jazz artist who's got Elvis on his list. So people that are, our age, they're going to say, oh, what'd you do with Elvis? I spent a whole day with Elvis doing a soundtrack album. My wife swears it was to Blue Hawaii. He was one of the nicest guys I ever met in my life. But I'll tell you about a jazz gig that I had in Norway with a singer named Magni Wenzel, who's a singer that Red Mitchell
bass player,
introduced me to. I mean, I made 3 albums with her. The second album was with Niels Henning Ørsted Pedersen. So I'm going to this gig, and it's just me and a bass player. And we get there, and on the marquee, it says, Roger Kellaway, pianist to Elvis Presley. And we walk in, and there's nothing on stage but a pool table. and they pull that off, and they give me an electric piano.
Oh, great.
And I've got a bass player. It's the old joke. He only knows 2 tunes, Happy Birthday and Blue and Green. And so that's what we did. But I spent a whole day with Elvis. It was, and I'm proud that I did, because it gave me the opportunity of knowing from all of the antics that he was part of in his own life, what a gentleman he was.
Interesting. So, and then of the other artists in this list, one I'm interested to ask you about, I was reading that it said that you were a part of the first jazz gig, kind of, that Yo-Yo Ma was ever a part of.
Yo-Yo...
And tell us about that.
I did an album with Yo-Yo and Stefan Grappelli called Anything Goes. And I don't think Yo-Yo had played any jazz before. Now, understand this. When I was in high school, I had a teacher named Henry Lasker, and he had told me, don't ever write out jazz. And I've spent my whole life doing that, because there's no way for a classical person to enter the world of jazz without having it written out. So you write it out first, and then you hope that they'll understand the concept of how to play it. So we were in France making this album, and that was the first, I think that was the first time that Yo-Yo had the opportunity of playing, let's not say jazz as much as he was playing jazz lines. And he was trying to understand jazz lines and to understand Stefan Grappelli's...
And the feel of swing, somewhat. Did you feel that how did he do?
If he slurred, he rushed. So I made him do everything. It's called détaché. That means, every note is a single stroke. Then I could get him into the time.
Interesting.
And I had John Burr on bass, so we had a lot of talks, and Yo-Yo got a lot of instruction, and it was all friendly.
Yo-Yo has a lot of his own Aspen history here with the classical festival in the summertime. He's been here
one
multiple
of the
times.
most brilliant musicians I've ever known in my life, and I'm happy to say he's a friend.
Lucky. So you're noted as a composer, and obviously you have had your feet in the worlds of jazz, classical, and pop music over many years. I was fascinated to read that you've done commissions for George Balanchine, the New York City Ballet, the LA Phil, the National Symphony, the New York Philharmonic with Zubin Mehta conducting, chamber music for Carnegie Hall, Yo-Yo, as you mentioned. So I'm curious, does classical music continue to heavily inform you're a jazz musician?
Yeah.
Where is classical music for you today?
Well, let's go back to the beginning, because I studied piano for 12 years, and I was studying to be a concert pianist. And somewhere around the age of 12, much to the chagrin of my classical teacher, I discovered jazz. Actually, I discovered George Shearing. I discovered I'll Remember April, and that became my tune.
Wow.
You know, that was released in sheet music.
Wow.
His arrangement. And so from the ages of 12 to 14, that was my hit. But the classical training, there's nothing that beats the classical training in terms of teaching you technique and how to play your instrument. There simply isn't. If there's anybody here who has a child and you're wondering, maybe they like jazz, or maybe they don't know whether they like classical or not, still classical is the way to go in the beginning, because of what it teaches you.
The fundamentals.
It is.
Yeah.
So that never leaves.
So that's still there for you. And then one of the pieces you composed, the cello quartet, was described as something that a kind of music, I don't know if anyone here has heard of it, called chamber jazz, which is a interesting hybrid that you were really a part of. And then it was also described, the same piece, the cello quartet, as the beginning of New Age music. So I thought, well, maybe that was just one random critic somewhere that said it. But I'm curious, you looking back, what was going on there?
No, there's another term that's much better.
Okay.
Crossover.
Crossover. The crossover from?
I don't want to be, well, it's a crossover of classical music and jazz. I wanted to write cello music, but I wanted it to be my own way. So I created a group that was cello, bass, piano, and marimba, all wood. But the cellist was Edgar Lustgarten, who had studied with Emanuel Feuermann and was one of the greatest cellists of the world. He had played in the studios for so many years that I could write out a jazz line for him, and he knew how to play it. So that was the beginning. Then I had myself, and I had Chuck DeMonico on bass and Emil Richards on percussion. So we were the improvisers. But that's where the cello quartet. You know, it's very interesting. I'll tell you what's curious about tonight. I had two piles of music. One was called the cello quartet, and the other pile of music was called the sax quartet. And believe it or not, the sax quartet refers to Tom Scott, who was here tonight.
So
I'm my guest.
I hope you brought that pile of music then.
But that's how the cello quartet got its name, because I never changed the name. The cello quartet, and people say, "Well, was it?" Actually, it was a play on what Bartok has, a clarinet trio, but it's clarinet, violin, and piano. It was a play on that, so I left it. No, I don't play cello. A lot of people thought I played cello.
Well, speaking of the cello, that reminds me of something else I read about you, which I'd love to hear you talk about. That you started obviously very young, 7. As you said, you discovered jazz
this
when
lifetime.
Yes, and you discovered jazz when you were about 12. But then, as I understand it, your early music career, you really played bass quite a bit. And so that to me is fascinating because whether jazz or classical, that bass is such an anchor. And so I'm interested about how that was.
Okay.
And then you left the piano after that at a certain point, but you played a lot of bass. You went on the road. You started as a bass player.
No.
Professionally.
Well, that's interesting. I've been a professional since I was 15. But in junior high school, piano was my first instrument, and I went to the junior high school auditions, and there were 8 piano players. And Vinnie Morato, I don't think I'll ever forget his name, was the leader, said, "How would you like to play one of those?" And he pointed up to, and the guy's name was Tenny Peck. And he was the sole bass player. And because I had played piano, I could read the bass clef.
Right.
So I picked up a bass, and I read it, and I watched where he put his hands. And I taught myself bass. 2 years later, I played 4th bass in the Massachusetts All-State Symphony. So, yes, I did a lot of bass, and Red Mitchell was basically my jazz hero. But my first 2 gigs on the road were Jimmy McPartland and Ralph Martiri on bass. I played bass for 10 years.
And but then ever since, have you played ever since then? Or?
I gave it up because there are too many things going on in my life to do. Bass.
Piano's a lot.
Yes. And bass is a lot. You really need to play bass all your life.
Yeah.
It's one of those things.
It's difficult, for those of you who don't know, especially playing the jazz bass and improvising and the sheer physicality of the instrument, it is a difficult instrument, and the great jazz bass players are master of their particular craft.
And we have one tonight.
Yeah, Jay Lenhart.
Jay Lenhart. I was thinking just before we came on to do this, I have played with Jay Lenhart so many times that I am now going to ask him for frequent flyer mileage.
So I was also reading that you started in New York, you settled in New York, you started to work. That was in the early 60s. And then in the mid-60s, you moved to L.A., and a whole new part of your career started film work, composing for movies, television. And then you did something with Bobby Darin back then that sounded quite interesting.
Yeah, I was Bobby Darin's musical director for 3 years. And he gave me Bobby Darin Sings Dr. Dolittle. We were the first people to do that on LP. That was a wonderful time in my life. I learned stage timing from Jackie Leonard, whom I did. He was before Bobby. Jackie Leonard and Bobby Darin taught me stage timing.
Just the pacing, the pacing of a show, a performance.
How to play the end of a tune, how to ride your audience, how to
perform.
Perform and have be alive.
That's a very interesting perspective. Not all jazz musicians have a sense of performance always, and just what you're talking about of how to shape a show. They can oftentimes be great musicians, but not have a sense of that. I'm always sometimes I'm surprised. Maybe I'm not.
I honestly think that it's a sense of theatrics, and yes, it's true. Some people don't.
Some have it and some don't.
Yeah.
You have a new project, or something that you did this year, it's read about, called The Many Moods of McCartney, Paul McCartney. Sounded wonderful. Tell us a little bit about that project.
There's an entrepreneur in New York, Dennis D'Amico, who is the consultant to Linda McCartney's Breast Cancer Research Foundation. And we were talking about doing a McCartney concert. He wanted to do several, just all McCartney concerts. So he put a concert together, and he had already booked Peter Beats, who is a wonderful piano player from Holland. And then he called me to be part of it, and he said, you know, you and Peter should do something together. And of course, it's all McCartney, so I'm studying McCartney, and I actually spent a year writing this piece because we had a couple of cancellations in Pittsburgh. But I kept on thinking about the idea of Peter and I. So the piece turned out to be 28 minutes for 2 pianos, bass, and drums. There are 10 McCartney songs used. They're not all used all the way through. And you can hear half of it on my website, on rogerkellaway.com. It was an interesting
project.
time, just exploring his music. You know, thinking back about McCartney. McCartney was part of the Beatles, of course, and in those days we hated him. And what I mean by that is that those of us who were in a jazz career hated the fact that that pop music was changing. And the music business was going to pick up on that and you know, leave us in the dust. So we weren't happy about that. But now, 40 or 50 years, I looked up every song that I wrote in this 28-minute piece. There isn't a song beyond 1970. And it's some of the most beautiful songs I've ever heard in my life.
I was just going to say that in hindsight, Paul McCartney is a great songwriter.
Yeah, he is.
So whatever you might say about the sound and how it was disruptive at the time, his songs will be standards of that will 100 years from now. I mean, my opinion is
you're right.
that he'll be a Stevie Wonder, and there were some great songwriters that came out of pop music, clearly. And I would say he would be one of them.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I'm going to give you a question that you have not been asked before, I'm confident.
Okay.
Which will be fun. I ask this of every artist, and then we'll open it up for a couple of questions from our audience members. So I'd like you to imagine for a moment that at the end of this weekend, you'll have a wonderful time here, and you'll have a very good feeling. And then someone will take you aside and say, someone that you know, and say, Roger, I have something very important to talk to you about, and you need to sit down because this is serious. Okay. You sit down and say, well, look, here's what's happening. I can't explain it to you, but for reasons that have to remain unexplained, you are being sent to a desert island for the rest of your life. And you will be provided for. There'll be food there. There'll be shelter. Water. Georgette can certainly go with you, but that's it. And there will be a beautiful stereo setup sound, and on your desert island, you can only bring 5 CDs with you, and you'll live for eternity on this desert island with those 5 CDs. So,
wow.
Yeah.
So the question is, what are they?
That's right.
Oh man. You know, I honestly, out of my own literature, I would take the cello quartet because the group means so much to me. But I might take.
We'll give you that as an extra one.
All right. Okay.
No,
An extra.
5.
Okay, 5.
You get 5.
I would take More Blues Than the Abstract Truth. Oliver Nelson.
Oh. I don't know that one, but.
Oh, well, you know Blues in the Abstract Truth. That was Bill Evans.
Mm-hmm.
That I did More Blues in the Abstract Truth. I might take it. There are 3 albums that I did with Oliver. Alfie was another one. Mm-hmm. I might do that, and I might do Bumpin' with Wes Montgomery. Mm-hmm. They were really, really terrific. I would think about taking something maybe by Fats Waller
The great
or
pianist.
Jimmy Yancey, or you know, somebody in that area, because those piano players really meant a lot to me. Now I was balancing those kind of piano players and the normal, you know, Monk and and Bill Evans and all these piano players that were part of the jazz scene, and 20th century classical music. So I think one of Stravinsky's pieces that I would take is the Symphony in C, which I absolutely adore.
From Fats Waller to the Symphony in C.
Yeah. Well, see, that's the way
lovely.
that's the way I grew up. Basically I'm a 5-year-old, and I'm very curious about everything and how it works. And I was that way before I was a teenager. I mean, I was listening to. Imagine this. I'm in high school. It's the number 3 high school in the United States. And we're doing the Bach Second Brandenburg Concerto, which is the one with the F trumpet. And the band guy, Red Darin, played it twice. I mean, he played the whole concerto twice through that day. It was just phenomenal. So I would go home and I would listen to that, and or I would listen to Woody Herman's Second Herd, particularly the Second Herd, with Zoot and Serge Charloff and Stan Getz.
Woody Herman's the big band leader.
Yeah. Or Stravinsky, and there are many other, you know, much more modern people than that, because I've listened to 20th century classical music since more than 50 years.
So with all of the music that you've played, so many different kinds, and then tonight, one of your guests, a wonderful Brazilian singer and guitarist. So was there a particular time or place? I certainly understand the affinity for the sound and the feel of Brazilian jazz. Mm-hmm. Or was that something that was part of your career at a particular time, or is this more a newer thing? Or?
Well, you know, I remember first hearing Brazilian music. I was working the Village Vanguard. And during intermission, they started playing Brazilian music, and we were all going, wow, what's that?
You mean when it was just coming out in the 60s?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But my wife, Georgiana, has been a friend and been a fan of Tekka's for probably 10 years.
Nice.
And about a year and a half ago, because she lives in Goleta, which is a ways from us, but still in Southern California. So we invited her and her producer to dinner to have a jam. Mm-hmm. And it was wonderful. Mm-hmm.
So,
you know, to play those songs, those beautiful songs, and all those great changes and all that. Oh. Yeah. It's like, wow.
A beautiful sound.
Oh, it's just.
I wish I could time travel to Rio in 1963. That would really be, that would be nice. Just that time of just the music just flowered. So almost an innocent time in hindsight, and such beautiful music that really took jazz around the world in different clothing. Yeah. But it was one of the sounds where jazz fused with an indigenous music and created something special that developed fans really all over the world. Jobim and Jorge Gilberto became international superstars, and their music absolutely embraced jazz as well as the feel of the bossa nova and the samba. It was magnificent music. So, okay, we're nearing the end. This has been wonderful. Would anyone here like to ask Mr. Roger Kellaway a question about anything? He's obviously a very capable and engaging speaker. Here we go.
Sure. I just wondered, when you were with Elvis or knew Elvis, did you ever know a man named Jack Marshall? He was a piano player that Elvis always hired play at his birthday party.
And he lived here.
Well,
I knew a guitar player named Jack Marshall. I didn't know a piano player. I didn't know a piano player though.
okay. Question over here.
Speaking of Elvis, in 1962, I saw an incredible 2-hour TV special, Blue Hawaii. Were you part of that?
No. See, everybody wants
To know
talk-
about Elvis,
they
just
do-
like you
they
said,
do-
you know.
They
Can't
do.
get away. Just some
No,
things
it's
you just
like-
can't shake. Shake, rattle, and
You
roll.
know, it doesn't matter that I've been with Quincy Jones. And in 2010, Quincy and I were at the New England Conservatory, and we both got honorary doctorates. So, you know, he's, you know, Dr. Jones, and I'm Dr. Kellaway, except that was his 39th.
Honorary doctorate. That's unbelievable. Does anyone know? Probably not, but I'll just mention Quincy Jones. And I don't know quite how old he is, but he's in his 80s for sure.
So,
isn't
yeah.
he?
Mm-hmm.
So he has.
84.
Yeah. So Quincy, a few years ago, ever the restless man that he is, started a management company and took a handful of young jazz artists under his wing and now has a very small kind of a boutique agency. It's just interesting at his stage. One of them is a young Cuban guy named Alfredo Rodriguez. There's the young pianist that we had here last year, the young kid from England who played all of the instruments, Jacob Collier, who's kind of do you know about this kid?
I
Jacob
do.
Collier? He's like from another planet. He's like the
impressed.
brother from another planet, what that guy does. Talk about playing different instruments and creatively and well. Anyway, so Quincy Jones, unbelievable. And he also manages the young pianist who's blind, who was here just a couple of weeks ago, who was in that film, Justin Coughlin. Have you heard this kid?
I don't think so.
Oh, check him out. I mean, just like a young genius, and a great story how he started, got into the Thelonious Monk competition, went to New York, froze literally in front of everyone, and then almost quit music, and then ended up being mentored by Clark Terry, who he started to help out. Clark was at the end of his life, and he started to just help him out, visit his apartment every day. And then they started to film a documentary about Clark, the end of his life, and mentoring this young kid. And then he really was helped, and he decided to go back, and now he's just flowering. Just unbelievable. And he's another client or protege of Quincy's. Interesting guy. Okay, well, Roger, it's been a pleasure. Can't wait for the show. Ladies
Thank
and
you.
gentlemen, Roger Kellaway. Showtime is 7 p.m. Enjoy some food, some beverage, conversation. Thank you for coming out. See you soon.